My name is Darian O'Reilly, and I am a senior UX designer here at Infragistics. I'm going to kick off our program today by talking to you about the design process and how to keep clients included in that and engaged without losing creative control and letting things go completely haywire. So who here is a designer in the room? Okay, who works in-house somewhere? Okay, a lot of you. Are there any freelancers? Okay, a couple. And anyone work at an agency? All right. So whether you're a freelance consultant, whether you work at an agency, or if you're in-house, you have clients. They might be people that you're meeting for the first time, or they might be your coworkers. The bottom line is if you design something for anyone that's not you, then you have experienced the push and pull of the creative process and creative control in that process. Before any project team meets for the first time, people usually have some preconceptions of what they want things to come out like in the end. So how do we harvest that information from the clients, and how do we curate it in a way that will acknowledge their wants and needs while still resulting in the best project solution that we can come up with? I'm going to walk you through the standard design process and break down each milestone that will offer structure, predictability, and most importantly, boundaries for your clients. So there are four basic stages of the design process that we're going to talk about today. The first is define. This is when we understand the user wants and needs and gather business and technology requirements. Next, we discover. That's the stage where we find out more about the personality of the project. We gain valuable information to inform the design direction, and we get an idea of the style of the client. Next, we design, and this is when you actually start creating things, ideating, prototyping, testing, and repeating, as we all know. Finally, when it's time to deliver, we want to make sure that what we're providing the developers with is what they need to bring the project to life as we see it, and not just as code would dictate. So in the first stage of define, we need to get a lot of basic information up front. And this is also a time for us to give information to our clients as well, so they know what to expect in the project. We've been asked to do this work for a reason. Our clients have a lot of ideas, but it's our job as designers to help them fit all of those ideas into a framework and come out with a beautiful end result. One of the most important things to not do at this stage is something that in my younger days I may have done a few times, and I'm sure some of you have as well, and that is this. Never, ever, no matter what you do, ask for an example of what a client likes. It's really the worst thing that you could possibly do in the beginning, because some things that may result from that question, I'm sure some of you can relate to this. I've gotten some responses like this. Because, it's important to know we're working on it every half an hour and keep changing the design. Could look like this if we really wanted it to. And then there's always, as we know, white space is not wasted space, but, everyone doesn't see it that way. So it's our job to educate so that this does not result. My absolute all-time favorite, and what I've probably gotten the most, is this beauty. More times than not, at a kickoff meeting, there's someone in the room who will pull me aside at some point and get this piece of paper out of their pocket and sort of coyly say, look, I put this together. It's usually an executive, too, so you can't just be like, oh, yeah, thanks. They pull it out, and they're like, oh, look, I put this together to give you an idea of what we're looking for. I used Microsoft Paint, because I'm a designer, too. But, you have to be nice, obviously, and everybody's ideas are not bad. Sometimes there's a good one. So not only do you want to keep the door closed on potential terrible ideas that clients might find compelling, but you also don't want to set expectations that your design is going to mimic something else, if it's something good. If a client offers you an example of an existing site or software application that they think is great and will solve all their problems, then it's really important that you and your team tell them that the work you're going to be doing is completely custom, that you don't want to look at other examples of websites that exist already because they're really going to, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There we go. They're really going to muddy the waters of creativity, and you want to make sure that everything you're doing from them is out of the box and fresh. And it's important to tell them that because they'll feel special, but also because that way they're not going to show you a printout of the latest iPhone release page and expect that whatever you build for them is going to be just like that. So, knowing what to avoid is half the battle, but what kind of information do we need to get up front with any project? There's a lot of different things that you need to know so that you can make something valuable. And asking for these things up front is the first step in creating a dynamic with your client where they feel like they're providing you with valuable information and that they're being heard and considered. It's also an opportunity to lay down the framework for the project. In addition to user research, you need to know some essentials. So, we start out with business goals. This is the basics of the project. What are we really trying to accomplish here? What is the thing that you're going to build? And one question that my project manager, Justin, who's going to be speaking later today, always asks at every kickoff meeting is, how will we know if it's a success? This is really a great question because it gives the client the opportunity to think about, well, how are we actually going to measure this? To tell you that information, and for you, ultimately, when you build it, to know that you did what you were being asked to do. They also know that you did what you were being asked to do, so they can't say, well, let's add in these extra 20 screens at the end because, we didn't really accomplish our goal, because the goal has already been established. The scope is, what's actually included. Will there be any user testing? Will there be any research up front? Will we test visual screens or just the wireframes? How many screens will we be designing? Stakeholder identification is, who do I listen to the most? Who are the decision makers? And although everyone's opinion is important, everyone's opinion is not equal. So we need to know who are we listening to in these meetings and whose feedback really matters. The target demographics, who are you building this for? Outlining some basic use cases is great because you need to know, in what context are people using this and what do they want to accomplish through doing so? What environment are they going to be using it in? What resolution do you need to design it to? That's the next one. What devices are you going to consider? Is it going to be a responsive project? Or is it just going to be designed for desktop or just a tablet? The technical requirements you need to know technical feasibility. If you design something that can't actually be coded in the code base that they're going to use, then there's no point in even designing that. So you need to get that information up front so that you can assure success down the line. Branding requirements, of course, for visual design, you need to know if there's a logo you have to use or a certain color palette or fonts, and just pray that it's not papyrus. And finally, accessibility. So beyond standard ADA compliance, is there anything you have to take into account? I actually worked on redesigning the CPA exam, and in the testing centers that they give the exam in, they have a privacy overlay on the screen that's a 20% black. So every design that we did had to have that 20% black filter over the top of it to be sure that it met accessibility contrast standards, even with that privacy screen. This is a visual that's included in every kickoff meeting that my team holds. It shows the relationships of the different team members and how we work together. And it also shows the key deliverables and is something easy to understand that clients can refer to down the line. So you can see, each colored bar represents a team member on the design team, and you can see how we interact together. Providing something like this is a predictable schedule that outlines what everyone can expect and puts everyone's mind at ease to remove questions about, how does this work together? Do you get feedback from this person? And simple things like, when are we going to see the wireframes? So by the end of your kickoff meeting, you should have this information at a bare minimum. The client should have provided, an introduction to their team, your design team provides an introduction to your team. You go over all of the requirements, whether they be usability, technical, visual design, et cetera. You cover the target demographics. And then the design team needs to provide a high-level description of the design process, show a timeline, highlight the major milestones, and finally, offer tools to establish design direction, which is what we're going to cover in our next step of the process, discover. Now, this is where we start to really get some creative input from the clients. We've gotten all of the actual logistical requirements, but what do they want it to look like and feel like? So something that I often use to gain this information is called the design workshop. This is an exercise in which a cross-section of the internal client project team reviews a whole bunch of images and selects the ones that they feel best reflect the brand, and also the ones that they feel best contrast with the brand. So we know what to avoid. Once they have made those selections, everyone gets a chance to explain why they made their choices. So how does this actually work? Okay, each member of the client team reviews 100 images. They're given 10 green stickers that they put on the images that they think reflect the project style in their mind. And they give them 2 red stickers that they use for images of things that they want to really avoid. Now, it's really important to stress to them that this is not a personal opinion type of situation. This is a big picture. Think about your company. Think about the project. Don't think about if you like sports cars or high heels. Think about if that would reflect the feel of your company. After everyone, while everyone's making their selections, you ask them to focus on why they're making these selections. You want, at the end result, to be a list of adjectives that you can then use to create word clouds, which will be used to create something else, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you need a lot of adjectives. So while they're making the selections, tell them to think about how they're going to explain why they chose what they chose. And then finally, review them. You go through and everyone just is able to have an opportunity to talk about their choices. Once you have your list of design adjectives, you take them and arrange them into groups that define possible direction for the project's look and feel. So you can see this image. People describe it as being bold, different, and engineered. Those might be from 3 different people. That's another interesting thing, is you could have a sports car. Someone might describe it as fast. Someone else might describe it as dangerous. So it could be positive or negative. You really need to see, it's more about the words and not so much about the pictures they choose to use them for. So once you have this big list, you put them into an Excel document and then group them into 3 groups. That's really up to you how you do that, but usually something will speak to you about, these things make sense together. And I always try to make them as different as possible, because then you offer as much choice to the client as possible. Once you have your groups, you make word clouds. And that helps to inform the design, the first step of the design process. So the design adjectives from the workshop are translated into style tiles. And these are options that the client will be given to choose from that will ultimately inform the design of the project. Now, it's important to create style tiles instead of just jumping right into the visual design screens, because first of all, you haven't even wireframed anything yet. You don't want to visually design something that's complex, that the client may then turn around and say, I don't really like green that much, so can we just change this? Because that is such a huge amount of rework that it's better to establish just the basic look and feel. I mean, you can see what's represented in here. It's sort of like a mood board. This isn't a screen. It's just showing fonts, colors, a little data viz. There could be form elements if that's relevant, and then button styles. Just basic things to sort of establish the really, really low-level design elements. I do 3 of them. And the client usually picks 1 or 2 to make a few small changes to, and then we hone in on 1. That way, they get excited about the visual design right up front. The architect starts doing the wireframes at the same time, and once the wireframes are done, we can pretty much apply the style that's defined in the tile that they choose. And it's a little bit predictable for the client to know, oh, you already know they're going to like it. As long as they like the interactions and they are happy with the style, it's a win-win-win for everybody. So your style tile plus your wireframes turn into a beautiful screen. And it's not a huge shock. If we just went right to this, can you imagine if they were like, it's a little dark for me? Where do you even go from there? So you save a lot of time and a lot of energy just getting that stuff established up front. So great. You designed something beautiful. You were organized. You included the client. We're done, right? No, we're not done. Not so fast. Who's going to build this thing? And what will it look like when they're done? You can't just give a development team a Photoshop or Illustrator file and wish them luck. No matter how many layers and labels and artboards you have and how carefully you've prepared everything, it's not enough unless you get very, very lucky that it will be built absolutely the way that you intend for it to be built. 2 items at this stage can make a world of difference, and they are a design spec, which is basically a style guide on steroids. You want to highlight every single pixel of every single thing included in your application. Every icon, every padding between a menu item, every single thing that there is. And just break it down and keep breaking it down piece by piece by piece until everything there's no questions left unanswered. The second element is the annotated design screens. And these go through interactions, animations, things like that. So what happens when I click on this? Because going from still image to still image or just dissecting a Photoshop file or an Illustrator file is not going to give the programmer that information. So why am I here again? You have to use your expertise to create beautiful results while making the client feel included and considered. And if you guide the project team through your design process, the end result will ultimately be your design, but it will have been informed by the client's input. Let's review some basic do's and don'ts for each step of the process. So in define, we do want to ask for project requirements. We do not want to ask for examples of things that the clients like. When we discover, we hold a design workshop regarding company, project, and style, but we do not ask for personal opinions or ever, ever voice your own. When you're designing, you create style tiles, then wireframes, and then visual designs. You do not jump right into fully designed screens. And when it gets time to deliver, you provide a full design spec and annotated screens. And you do not just give them a PSD and a pat on the back, because that will not get you there. Last but not least, some final words of wisdom. Don't get hung up on the details. I know especially all you in-house folks, corporate guidelines do not always allow for the flexibility that you would like. And sometimes you're stuck with a really bad logo, and you have to keep using it, and no one will let you redesign it. They never will. It's just going to look like that forever. So get used to it and roll with the punches. You have to just forge ahead and make it as good as you possibly can. Also, the client is not always wrong. Someone might have a valuable insight, and it's important to keep an open mind and listen, because most importantly, we are all in this together. Anyone have any questions? No? Wow. Oh. I usually just create them in Photoshop, but you could also do it in Illustrator, anything that you would design full screens in, any design program you like, Sketch would work, anything. Anyone else? No? Okay.
I'll ask one,
okay,
in case anybody else has one. How do you tell the clients when you're going to do a workshop, do you tell them what types of people should be included? So how do you know what types
Right.
of
Well,
people?
that's a good question, and we've had all types of groups included. Sometimes you get their full in-house design team. I don't know if anyone who is in-house has been included in something for an agency and felt really, really stepped on, because I've had that experience too. You're kind of like, okay, so why'd you hire these people? I'm not good enough for you. But I think the main thing is you want to make sure you have a cross-section. If you have any ability to control who's going to be included in that kickoff meeting, which sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, you want to have a cross-section so that really anyone who's going to be a decision maker, especially people who are included in corporate branding, are important to have there because they're the ones whose input is really going to be the most relevant.
I was wondering if you had any advice for kind of pushing back if they are pushing on you to get to designs faster rather than doing that legwork you need to do to create the palettes in the workshop.
Well, that's a great question because I know especially if you're working alone, it's really hard to do more than one thing at once. But the process that we usually do is one person is working on style tiles while the other person is working on wireframes. So there's a lot to show all at once. And sometimes we even have the second meeting sometimes includes presenting both of those items. So they're really feeling like, wow, we're really moving here. Like, look, we already have a little bit of the wireframing done because we also outline in the kickoff meeting that these are definitive steps that we have to go through to make a relevant project. If we just say, let's just design something, then, you don't even, it's not even UX anymore. So I think, giving them information up front and then making sure that you're giving them a little taste of things will make them not push back so much.
Hi.
Hi.
So the style tiles and the wireframes sort of come at the same time? Is that?
In the same general area.
Okay, so what do you do if, like the style tiles, which are very informed by opinion, and the wireframes, which should probably not be informed by opinion
fact,
at all,
right?
what do you do if they contradict?
I'm sorry?
What do you do if they contradict? And does that ever happen?
Oh, okay. Well, the style tiles don't include any actual interactions. They're really just design elements. So your colors would not be really contradicting anything. Your fonts would be not contradicting anything. There is also some flexibility where, specifically for buttons or something, button styles, because that's something we always include on the style tile, where when you actually get into, okay, I'm going to design the visual design screen now, you're in the situation where that button is just not going to work, so you just change it and you explain why you changed it. Or if no one notices, you don't explain anything and you just change it. Yes? Okay.
Let me get you the mic here.
So my question is, where does user comes in the mix when we are doing the research and when we are delivering, when we do the testing and all in your projects, how you do that?
Okay, well, there's several different intervals at which that makes sense. Ideally, we have some user interviews up front, and then once there's wireframes, we get some user testing on the wireframes for usability. And then once the visual design screens are done, we can test those to make sure that that's still communicating the same thing. And iterating the testing is great. You don't always have that freedom because you don't always have that budget. But ideally, that's the best. And then once the thing is built, another round of user testing. Yes, in the back? Just yell it out, I guess.
Okay. So kind of going off of her question with research, when does it come into the picture, right? And when you have these meetings and let's say your client already has some research done, how do you leverage that into, throughout the process?
Well, that's a good question. So sometimes, and it's always a different story, so nothing ever can follow exactly the same formula. Sometimes clients do already have some research that someone else has done for them, that they've done internally, and research can mean different things to different people. We like to review that, and part of the kickoff meeting is usually the client presenting where their current state of affairs. So we have this research, it shows these things, this is our current application, you're redesigning, or we don't have an application and this is what we need the new application to do. So that's in that requirements gathering stage, would be existing research, but ideally also, not as part of the kickoff meeting per se, but around that same time, you want to try to do some user research with either existing users of their current application or people who would be using the thing that they're going to build if it doesn't exist yet. So it's all around that same time, right at the beginning of the project, that you'd want to gain that research in that requirements gathering stage. Anyone else? All right. Should probably.
Okay, thanks, Darian.
Great. Thank you.